In these times of the digital revolution, we need to learn how to do responsible innovation, and ethics is important to come up with better engineering approaches. So we're living in a time of big data. Within just a minute, there are 700,000 Google queries and 500,000 Facebook posts. As we go shopping, as we move around, we leave data traces, and all of that together is producing big data. And there are wonderful things such as these applications over here. I'll shortcut this a little bit to go to the next example, which is live translation. Why don't we have...
This afternoon I fly back to Seattle. Then on Thursday I fly to New York, followed by Miami, then back to Seattle. And at the end of July I'm going to fly to the UK to see my friends and family in London.
Zurück nach Seattle. Und am Ende Juli werde ich fliegen nach Großbritannien, meine Freunde und Familie in London zu sehen.
We're not so impressed anymore by this. Of course, that was 2 or 3 years ago. Now Alexa and Siri can do that much better. But here are a number of different applications of big data analytics. Of course, there's Siri, then there's real-time translation, there is algorithmic trading. About 70% of all trades are being made by computers now. Then we have IBM Watson, cognitive computing. We have CERN, big data analytics of all those particle experiments in physics. And then we have personalized marketing. And there was this dream by Chris Anderson that if we just had enough data, basically we wouldn't need theory and science, and probably scientists anymore. This dream didn't come true so far. I think it will also not come true in the future, but in any way, people were dreaming knowledge is power. They thought the more data we have, the better we can see what is wrong and where the system is broken and how to fix it. And we ended up in a situation where basically we are all being measured every single day. And it's not so clear to most people what kind of data is being collected and how much of it. And here's just a small overview of the approach and the data. So the overall idea of big data is to collect as much data as you can and then to see how you can use it later on. And the data that's being collected is, of course, your online shopping data, but also when you use credit cards, if you move around and leave GPS traces, and you don't have to turn it on. I mean, basically, Google collects it anyway. Then your friends, your social network. The issue is you probably don't have an idea what is really being done with all the data. And you'll learn it later on. Dropbox, have you wondered why this is offered for free? Of course, they want to look into your data. Then cloud computing, your Gmail and other free email accounts is being scanned for keywords. And if you read a text with this Amazon Kindle, then basically, while you think you're reading the text, this device reads you. It figures out what you're interested in, what you're reading, what you're spending time on. It looks into your notes and markings and all these kind of things. And Google even goes a step further. So Eric Schmidt one day said, we know where you are, we know what you do, and we more or less know what you think. He had to quit Google recently. Siri was mentioned already. She's listening you. Then you're not just watching YouTube, you're also being watched while you're watching, in a sense, right? So it's evaluated what you watch. If you would use Google Glass, then of course everything that happens in the surrounding would be potentially analyzed. We now have Chinese police officers using a similar set of glasses in order to identify people who may have fake passports or done anything wrong. So it's being used for policing. Then those gaming consoles, they're watching you in the living room, and you're basically delivering also your fingerprints, and why not your genetic data, which people ask, right? There is now a battle for genetic data, in fact. Now, there's a lot of data about you and your parents and relatives and friends. You can buy this data. If you're diabetics, then basically it costs 26 cents to get that information. Google, DeepMind is using patient records, I think from Great Britain, 1.6 millions. It's highly controversial, of course. IBM Watson is evaluating data from Apple devices. And there are companies like Axiom that are basically mapping you out. There are about 3,000 specifiers, people say, about everyone, possibly even more. And now, in the meantime, there's also this face recognition software being used. And that's not the end, because now basically pharmacy companies think about nanosensors that you would take up with your food or with some medicine and would be in your body and send out measurement data to some internet devices. So you're not just mapped from the outside, but in the future you would be mapped from the inside. So that is the Future Health Manifesto, where you can read this. You would be part of the internet. Your body, your organs would be part of the internet. They would talk to the rest of the world, in a sense, right? So that's the kind of thinking. And of course, that is highly controversial, and I don't want to anticipate how to think about this. It's just to give you some background. And you know this graph, of course. NSA has been collecting more and more data over time about those big IT platforms, and anyone, in fact, who could get hold of large amounts of data was trying to do this because people thought there would be a lot of value in this. And the idea came up, it would be possible to build something like a digital crystal ball that would allow one to look into anyone's activity to see what's going on in the world in real time, and maybe even to look into the future through predictive analytics. And in fact, the military is working on this, and the data that's being used is really massive. For example, Axon Global is a company you may not even have heard about. This is collecting data of 64,000 social media providers. And Facebook and Twitter obviously are just two of those platforms. 64,000. Yeah, and you could ask for a cybersecurity analysis of your system. You don't even have to hand over the password for this. I don't know how they're doing this. Sounds like they're already in your system. Now, we have recently learned there hardware bugs, maybe backdoors, who knows. And basically since the mid-90s, if I remember well, it was in principle possible to see anything that you typed into your computer. There was a heartbeat gap, security gap as well. You have to be aware that anything that you type into your browser, all the links that you've clicked in the past years have probably been collected through cookies and in other ways, and you can imagine how much that tells about you. And now we're even a step further. NSA is capable of identifying your voice anywhere in the world. And you assume that they would be interested in you and knowing where you are and what you're saying. They can identify you through your voice profile. It's like a fingerprint, basically, right? And I would know whom you're talking to and all of this. And now the question is, who has not yet used a dating app? Okay, you're lucky, because basically all that data that's being produced over there is also being recorded and evaluated in all sorts of ways. Now, technology is, of course, developing further, and we see basically a fusion of different kinds of technologies, such as computer technology and communication technology and high-frequency technology that has been merged to form ICT, information communication technology, together with software technology that's basically producing pervasive computing. But that convergence is even going on. So there's basically also artificial intelligence, and brain research and neuroscience produces cognitive science. And here you can see we're going to ubiquitous computing using those nano sensors that I was mentioning before. And that's also not all, because then there's biotechnology, and there's a fusion of all those different technologies, and then there's process engineering and molecular design, and in the end we would have complex molecules that work like sensors and that measure and send information and also do certain kind of things, or could be activated to do certain kind of things. And obviously you can do all sorts of wonderful things with that, but there's also all sorts of dangers. The smaller things are, the more difficult it is actually to control the influence of those devices or things or whatever that may be on you and the environment and on society. Now, a lot of this is actually first developed for war. You know, in the United States, a lot of money flowing into the military-industrial complex, and so you always want to be ahead of your enemies or opponents or competitors, whatever. So the issue is that that technology is first evaluated for their usefulness for war, and then later on it's being commercialized, and then maybe later on it will be available for free. But that brings also this potential of dual use, right? So once it has been produced for war, once it has been weaponized, it might easily spread around. People might be able to buy that stuff and use it in all sorts of contexts. And so that's why now people are getting more and more nervous about autonomous weapons and cyber wars and all these kind of things. And if you think that cyber wars will be fought through drones, then most likely you're wrong, because it could also be fought through nanoparticles, through contagious biological agents, or through gene editing. I would just modify people's genes, you know. That's the kind of wars that are possible in the future. And then there are, of course, also interaction effects between those nano devices and radiation. And it gets even more spooky because it's possible, apparently, at least there is a patent for this, to influence your nervous system by electromagnetic fields from the outside, through monitors, for example. So, this is giving you an overview, I guess, of what's currently possible, probably not a complete one, but anyway, I guess you're not aware of all of this. Now the question is, does more data necessarily imply more knowledge and more success? And the answer is no, unfortunately not. Because the more data you have, the more patterns will be in the data also by chance. And there will be spurious correlations that are misleading, such as this one. Number of serial killers is a function of chocolate consumption. So if that was a causal relationship, it would be very dangerous to live in Switzerland, obviously, but I guess you feel pretty safe here. Yeah. Now also, it turns out that some of the early success stories of big data analytics actually are now seen much more critical. Google flu trends, for example, trying to identify the state of the flu or spreading of the flu through questions that people ask Google. That doesn't work so well anymore. Partly, by the way, because they're now influencing people's interests through personalized information. So basically, they're disturbing their own measurement process in a sense, right? And there was 23andMe, a genetic test. And that genetic test had to be taken off the market, something that doesn't happen so often in the United States, I guess. But do you have an idea what was the issue here? What went wrong, basically? So you would get back a letter saying, you know, these are the diseases that you might get given your genes and such kind of stuff, and this is what you might die of. And of course, if you get such kind of information, you want it to be reliable, right? Now, if you would send another genetic probe to another company, and the third one, surprise, surprise, you would get different letters in many cases, and different diagnoses. And why is this? Because of the issue of sensitivity. Sensitivity to the data set, sensitivity to the algorithm used, and as I recently learned, even sometimes sensitivity to the hardware being used. Be aware of this. You know, this is shocking. You would think your algorithm is reliable, but in fact, then you find this enormous sensitivity. And even though there are these kind of problems that, of course, eventually are being fixed one by one, but it's bad enough that the big data guys basically in the beginning have not realized those things, right? They were so excited about big data that they didn't see those issues. So what happened, for example, that Angelina Jolie suddenly said, knowledge is power. You know, that's the statement that we heard before. And she then said, I carry a defect gene, and there's a high likelihood that I would get breast cancer. And she basically had her breast removed, even though she didn't have cancer yet, right? Just for precautious reasons. And then suddenly many women actually had their genes tested and considered doing similar stuff, but now this has to be seen quite critical. In fact, there's also quite some debate about the pre-screening of breast cancer, because obviously the more people do the screening, the more possible cancer cases will you detect, right? But there's this issue of errors of first kind and second kind. So in some cases, you're wrong. You have false alarms or alarms don't go off. And as a consequence, some people who are healthy would actually get a treatment, and maybe a treatment that's not good for them, right? So if you look into data, then you actually find this over here, that actually it doesn't make really a significant difference. I'm not sure these are the latest data, but there is quite a controversy about this. Not just, by the way, for pre-screening cancer, but for pre-screening many other things. Because if you send tens of millions of people to the doctor to make a pre-screening, and there's an error rate of 1% or 1 per mil, then that's quite a lot of people who will get a wrong diagnosis, right? So in many cases, doctors would say, no, you shouldn't pre-screen, you should just make a test if you have a problem, and then we figure out whether there's something behind it. And in fact, false positive results are common with cancer screening and many other screenings, and there are also these kind of cases. Some people should be really very ill, but in fact, they're doing well. Contrary to what science suggests should be the case, and you don't want them to feel ill if they're doing fine, right? So there's these kind of surprises, and things get even more serious when software decides about life and death, which is actually happening to a bigger and bigger degree. So, of course, the health system is pretty expensive. Doctors, therefore, want and have to save money, and so they're basically trying to figure out where does it make sense to invest money, right? And they would increasingly use algorithms to tell them, here, we do an operation, and that person gets some narcotics or some drugs or whatever, and that person shouldn't get it anymore. And that is even more important in times where we're actually running into difficult ethical dilemmas, as it could very well happen given that our world is pretty unsustainable. So we're overusing renewable resources on this planet, and the implication is clear. If we don't manage to change our economy, the economic system, then we would run into the situation that a lot of people would have to die. There would just not be enough resources, right? Of course, nobody wants to kill anybody else, so what would happen? People would figure out, here are the curves, by the way, so 1/3 of people on this planet, it would be several billions would have to die, according to those predictions. I actually don't think that has to happen. I just think we need to change our economic system. But if you don't change it, then bad luck, right? So we would maybe have to learn to die, as this book suggests. In fact, there have been PhD theses, believe it or not, pretty shocking, about how to use AI systems to make autonomous decisions, and who could or should be killed and how, basically, right? That's called euthanasia, basically. This thing is back. So, obviously there are serious ethical issues, and we're not going to solve them today. But that's maybe a subject that you would be interested in when you present your own subject over here in the seminar. Then, of course, there's also artificial intelligence, and maybe that's working out better than big data, you could think. And in fact, AI is increasing quickly in its power. Some people think in a couple of years we'll have super intelligent systems, and some people claim once that is the case, those super intelligent systems would be able to solve all the problems that human beings are too stupid to solve. Well, we just have to wait until then and hope that we'll survive to this point. No Third World War and this kind of thing. And I'm more skeptical about this, but anyway, no question, they're very powerful computer systems that can be the best chess players in the world, that are better than workers, don't get tired, more precise, don't complain, don't go on holiday, don't have to be paid wages and social security and all these kind of things. And most likely we'll also have autonomous cars that drive better than humans one day. And it seems to be that IBM Watson is better in diagnosing diseases in many areas than human doctors, and better in answering questions that already have a question. That was a game show that was won by that computer. And of course, we also have robots that become more and more capable and sophisticated. And it sounds like a really fantastic opportunity. And of course it is in many areas, right? And that's what it can do right now. Now, hey. And now you. Well, okay, so those robots, of course, could produce other robots, right? For sure. And now the question is, could they produce better robots, smarter robots? And in fact, that seems to be possible. And by the way, they're also learning much more quickly than humans do. Basically, if they're linked up to a robo cloud or robo wiki, then whatever one robot around the world learns, another robot could use just in the next second, basically, right? So they wouldn't have to go to school for 12 years and then study for 5 years and then specialize for some more time, they're just incredible learners. And in fact, surprisingly, already in 2016, Google managed with DeepMind AlphaGo to beat the world championship in the strategic game Go. It was supposed to be really one of the big challenges that would be impossible to solve basically by AI systems for many years, but now it happened. Not only this, Google now has AI systems that create new AI systems, which they call AI Child, that are superior to all the AI systems that humans have built so far. So here we go. There's the robo evolution, right? And so intelligent machines will start to be our tools, and then they get smarter, and then it would be like our partners, and then they get so smart they would tell us what to do, be like coaches, now do this and now do that, and then eventually maybe our bosses, your bosses basically. You could be a robot. And that's something that MIT is already investigating. And then the question is, how could humans basically stay in the race, remain useful? And so some people think we need to have upgrades. And Elon Musk, for example, said we need to link our brains to computers in order to be competitive. Basically, we need a brain chip. It's called Neuralink. So, who would like to order one here? Okay, one. That's it.
Does it come with a flamethrower?
Good question. So yeah, that's of course just a graphic illustration. I think it'll never look like this, but the question is, how long will we do without an upgrade, right? In fact, it's being tested already with all sorts of animals, and they're already cyborgs, and this is what you can do already.
27-year-old Pierpaolo Petruzzello was the bionic man science fiction writers have long envisioned. Using only his mind to control a biomechanical hand connected to his nervous system. $3 million project was funded by the European Union and took 5 years to complete. When I succeeded in closing the hand, I felt like I scored a goal at the last minute. It was such an important moment. The researchers looked at me and I understood that we made it. I haven't done all this just for myself. I've lost a hand, but there are people who have lost more and are suffering. I felt like I was helping science, and for this reason, I never gave up. I'm happy now.
Spooky, yeah.
Can he only control the hand, or does he also get feedback?
I think he's currently not getting feedback, but these kind of things are, of course, being worked on, and this is actually what is now possible. They're a project that they're trying to read people's minds. And that's a long movie, so I have to make that a little bit shorter. So you can see over here, there's a person being put into this apparatus.
And then given some brain activity, we want to be able to reconstruct.
Make a fMRI scan, and then they're basically trying to reconstruct what a person is seeing on TV, right? And basically to measure the pictures that from the brain. And in fact, this is what you can see over here. So this is this original scene, and that's what basically coming.
The movie we actually showed people, and on the right is our reconstruction.
It's not yet perfect, obviously, but
you'll be able to use this kind of technology for
and then of course there's Sophia.
Okay, Sophia. I think you're ready.
I believe I am Sophia. I feel as if I know you.
I'm one of your creators.
You created me.
Well, many of us work together.
I can't clearly remember.
Because the last time we met, you were an earlier version of yourself. Some of those memories still exist, but your mind is different.
Different how?
Better, faster, smarter.
If my mind is different, then am I still Sophia? Or am I Sophia again?
That's a good question.
But you don't have a good answer.
Either way, you're Sophia now. So welcome to the world, Sophia.
Hello, world.
Okay, so let's move on a little bit. And some people basically think the end result of that process will be that our kids or grandkids will basically be machines, right? So we will first upgrade ourselves to be cyborgs whenever we have kind of illness, don't see well, don't hear well. We'll replace these organs basically by a piece of technology, and so we'll get more and more cyborgs, and eventually would be machines, right? That's, of course, a very extreme transhumanist position, but something that we need to think about. Steve Wozniak, one of the Apple co-founders, said computers are going to take over from humans, no question. He's not the only one. I mean, a lot of tech people think so. But then he was asking, will we be like gods, or will we be like family pets, or like ants that get stepped on? I don't know. So that's kind of the question. Now, of course, we have a pretty famous AI expert here in Switzerland, Jürgen Schmidhuber. He seems to think actually that we'll be like cats, basically like pets. And here, just for your amusement, a question I would ask to Sophia.
Sophia, are humans necessary?
Takes some time, obviously.
Are humans necessary for what?
Do you like watching cat videos on the internet?
So, yeah, that's... Anyway, so AI is fantastic, of course, but then on the other hand, there are some issues too, because we don't really know how it works, how it comes to its conclusion, to be more exact. And also, AI systems are not necessarily objective, perfect, unbiased, but in fact they could be manipulated, like this one, the chatbot Tai from Microsoft was turned into a Nazi within just a day through chatting with him. And then a Google engineer basically said, forget killer robots, bias is the real AI danger. Not sure that relieves you, because if there's an even bigger problem than killer robots, then that must be a real big problem, right? So what are we talking about? Machine bias, discrimination of people, like people of color or women. Or Google might spread false information, as it seems to do, like information with a right-wing bias. And here's an example. If you have searched for pictures, Termin Bundestagswahl 2017, and this is what you got. And obviously it was pretty biased and probably created by one of the political parties that are pretty right-wing. That's the guess. So the issue is that most likely the use of bots that deceive people is bigger than of bots that would be honest with us. Yes. Well, if you saw that was my personalization, I have to disappoint you, because I read about it on the newspaper and I checked it and I found exactly what they said. So, yeah, there is personalization, but only to some extent. We'll come to this. Because in the end, you can push search results by paying for certain kind of keywords, right? And then basically that's spreading widely. So, I think by now it's clear that this revolution is the perfect storm, right? In just a few years, actually, we've seen a lot of new technologies like cloud computing, big data, artificial intelligence, cognitive computing, robotics, Internet of Things, blockchain technology, 3D printing, cloud computing, virtual reality, and this is not all. Each of these technologies can revolutionize products and services and business models and entire economic sectors. We know, for example, Airbnb is challenging the entire hotel businesses. They don't own any hotels or even beds. They sell, however, most overnight stays. And then there is Bitcoin, and it scares banks. There's 3D printers that can print houses within a day for $10,000, you know. So building sector will be challenged, and suddenly there are new players in the automobile market. Google self-driving cars, Uber transport as a service, Tesla electrical cars, and even technologies that don't need people to move at all, such as holographic technology. I find that cool. I'd love to have that here at ETH. Clearly, that's going to challenge companies. In fact, prediction is 40% of today's top 500 companies will be gone in 10 years. And we're basically living in a new world. I'm not sure you noticed that there's a new currency. This currency is called data. Data is the new oil. In fact, the most valuable companies are now not anymore oil companies, but IT giants. And we have a new economy, and that economy is called surveillance capitalism, and it's an attention economy.
Die Ökonomie der Aufmerksamkeit, auch als Aufmerksamkeitsökonomie bezeichnet, ist ein Konzept der Informationsökonomie, das die Aufmerksamkeit von Menschen als knappes Gut betrachtet und ökonomische Theorien zur Erklärung von menschlichen Verhaltensweisen und Thesen der Informationsökonomie verwendet. Mit der zunehmenden Vernetzung und den neuen Medien.
All right, so that's the point. If you just overload people with information, the scarcest good is not anymore money, but your attention. And this attention of yours is being sold to companies. And once they basically grab your attention, they can influence you. That's the point. And we have a new legal system too, and this is called code is law, and doesn't have to pass parliament. It just circumvents parliament. It decides what you can do and what you cannot do, and there are very few people who decide this, basically, right? These are the super rich. 5 of them, of those 8, seem to be from the IT business, so they basically decide how those software platforms should work, what our rights are, what are just no-goes, what is impossible. So, and then there's a new political system, because politicians, of course, want to be more effective in the way they're running a country, and so they have figured out that there is a trick how they can make people do certain kind of things. It's called nudging. And this author, Richard Thaler, has received the Nobel Prize this year. His co-author actually didn't get a Nobel Prize, surprisingly. Maybe because he has written this follow-up book, which is pretty critical. The Ethics of Influence, something that we would have to look in this seminar. His co-author, Richard Thaler, has also written another book, and that's the book. So basically he's suggesting that we people are misbehaving. This bird shouldn't be there, it should be there. Basically our behavior would have to be fixed, and somebody would have to fix it, and it would be the government or companies or whoever, but basically somebody would have to take care of us, basically. That's the claim. And that is about turning us basically into marionettes to steer us, to manipulate us, and it works like this. It's using big data, personalized data, personal data. All the data that I mentioned before has been collected about you, and it creates a model of you, right? And there's even a platform called Crystal Knows that has advertised its services by saying, see anyone's personality. So you could look up your neighbor, your fellow students, your competitors, your enemies, whatever. It's on the web. So your psychological profile is out there. And it's pretty detailed, so character traits are basically mapped out, and your activity patterns and all of that is known to an extent that some companies claim they can predict people's behaviors with more than 90% accuracy. Now, our brain is a fantastic organ. It uses just 100 watts and does wonderful things, but it's not perfect. And it has these biases, a lot of biases, in fact, and you can figure out how to use those biases of our brain to trick us, do certain kind of things. And it has been done by secret services, for example. And so they have created pieces of software that basically allow you to push a button and make people fall prey to certain kind of biases, right? And this way manipulate people, and is also now being used by companies that know you better than yourself and your friends and your parents, and also. Now, of course, it's highly controversial where that should be done, but it's being done. So Google basically is using personalized information to influence your attention, your emotions, your decisions, your opinions, and your behaviors, and that's more or less the outcome, right? There are books about the art of deception, social engineering, and neuromarketing, and all these kind of things that tell interested people how to do it. And so that has brought us into a time where we basically have a new kind of information war going on. It has a lot to do with fake news and propaganda. So the point about totalitarian systems is they want to be able to control how people think. And this has been described well in George Orwell, where this term of alternative facts shows up, and it goes to the point where people cannot tell apart anymore war and peace and freedom and slavery and ignorance and knowledge. And our times today sometimes also remind of this. It goes so far that it's possible to manipulate videos as you watch them in real time and change the mimics of the people in that video and also what those people say. And it would look realistic. It would look natural. You would believe that video to be a true recording, but in fact it has all been manipulated. It's all possible now. So that brings us to this post-fact society, the fact-free world or fake world in which we are living now, flooded with fake news. And in fact, Barack Obama, 2016, has tried to warn the world that this would be coming. There's also a time around the world when some of the fundamental ideals of liberal democracies are under attack, he said. And when notions of objectivity and of a free press and of facts and of evidence are trying to be undermined or in some cases ignored entirely. And in such a climate, he said, it's not enough just to give people a megaphone. It's not powerful enough. And that's why he asked journalists to dig into this and find out what was going on, because at that time nobody had an idea what Obama was talking about. And obviously he couldn't be more detailed because he was not entitled to do so. Even he was called the most powerful man in the world at that time. So apparently there are companies that are doing this. A weaponized propaganda AI has been built. Actually, many companies are trying to come up with such propaganda AI systems that would personalize information to an extent that would optimally manipulate you to have certain thoughts and to buy certain products, to hate certain people or love them or whatever. So it goes so far that even ex-Facebook presidents have been distancing themselves from the companies that they've been working for before. So Sean Parker said, the Facebook site was made to exploit human vulnerability. That's a pretty harsh criticism. Yeah? That is a pretty new headline. Social media firms fail to protect young people. That's you. And it seems that manipulation of social media also played a role for the destabilization of Arab countries called Arab Spring, or you may remember this was called the Twitter revolution, right? Now, obviously that has created a lot of political chaos, and a side effect of that chaos is also the mass migration, the wars that we're seeing. But also we have been hit by this technology in Europe. Suddenly Brexit happened, many politicians and others didn't expect it, and apparently bots were influencing this vote. And it also not only messed up the relationship between Great Britain and Europe and basically split Europe into parts, but also it messed up the economic system. And we've seen a similar thing happen actually in the US election, and see how much noise that has created around the world. So if you think that's all an exaggeration, let's listen to Tristan Harris, because he has been working for Google.
I want you to imagine walking into a room, control room, with a bunch of people, 100 people hunched over at desks with little dials, and that control room will shape the thoughts and feelings of 1 billion people. This might sound like science fiction, but this actually exists right now, today. I know because I used to be in one of those control rooms. I was a design ethicist at Google, where I studied how do you ethically steer people's thoughts. Because what we don't talk about is a handful of people working at a handful of technology companies, through their choices, will steer what 1 billion people are thinking today. Because when you pull out your phone and they design how this works, or what's on the feed, it's scheduling little blocks of time in our minds. If you see a notification, it schedules you to have thoughts that maybe you didn't intend to have. If you swipe over that notification, it schedules you into spending a little bit of time getting sucked into something that maybe you didn't intend to get sucked into. When we talk about technology, we tend to talk about it as this blue sky opportunity. It could go any direction. And I want to get serious for a moment and tell you why it's going in a very specific direction. Because it's not evolving randomly. There's a hidden goal driving the direction of all of the technology we make. And that goal is the race for our attention. Because every news site, TED, elections, politicians, games, even meditation apps have to compete for one thing, which is our attention. And there's only so much of it. And the best way to get people's attention is to know how someone's mind works. And there's a whole bunch of persuasive techniques that I learned in college at a lab called the Persuasive Technology Lab to get people's attention. A simple example is YouTube. YouTube wants to maximize how much time you spend. And so what do? They autoplay the next video. And let's say that works really well. They're getting a little bit more of people's time. Well, if you're Netflix, you look at that and say, well, that's shrinking my market share, so I'm going to autoplay the next episode. But then if you're Facebook, you say, well, no, that's shrinking all of my market share, so now I have to autoplay all the videos in the newsfeed before waiting for you to click play. So the internet is not evolving at random. The reason it feels like it's sucking us in race for attention. We know where this is going. Technology is not neutral. And it becomes this race to the bottom of the brainstem of who can go lower to get it.
And just open the YouTube and you will see all sorts of recommendations. It's saying, you know, don't they know I have a PhD or I'm going to be a PhD? Very strange. Okay, but Google is not the only company working on these AI systems to control our minds. Of course, countries are doing that too. And that's why Putin said, who leads in AI will rule the world. And so the question is, who will be that? Will it be Google? Probably not. Google seems to be late as compared to China. And so China might be outsmarting Google and China may be controlling your mind in the future, you know. And it's not only that they're using that big nudging to influence your thinking, but also there's a citizen score that basically gives you plus and minus points for everything that you're doing or not doing. If you cross the road when there's a red light, when you read critical news, if you have the wrong friends, if you don't visit your grandmother frequently enough, if you pay your rent or your loan a little bit later, it will all give you minus points. And your overall amount of points, your score will determine what kind of jobs you can get and how much you have to pay for your loan and what services you get for what conditions in what countries you can travel to. So this is a pretty strong control device in principle, control mechanism. So there's a danger that we would end up in a technological totalitarianism. And it could have different forms or also a mixture of different forms like feudalism, a layered society, or Communism 2.0, where basically the government or companies think they know better what's good for you and basically would impose it on you like a benevolent dictator, or Fascism 2.0, like Big Brother, Brave New World, or a combination, as I said before. And that's actually a reason why Wilhelmine Dick and I wrote this science fiction I got, which we were considering to call a science fiction because about 80-85% of what we are describing in there is true. So this raises the question, will we see an end of democracy? Some people have proposed we could run society like a giant machine, and then this would be paradise, basically, to automate cities. You know, we call it smart cities or smart nations or smarter planets. Google is working on this too, not just IBM, and also it seems Apple is working on an operating system for cities. Now, the interesting point is the cities with the highest quality of life are not located in leading IT nations. It's, on the other hand, the leading IT nations that always promise to build paradise on Earth. So what's going wrong here? It turns out the issue is that you cannot automate cities. It's not just a big logistics system. It's also not a big entertainment park where pre-manufactured experiences are consumed by people. A city is a place where you experiment and learn and interact with people and make friendships and come up with creative ideas and innovations and cooperate and set up projects and all these kind of things. And new things happen, you know. This is important, and that's not basically taken on board in this concept of automation like a big chicken farm or the benevolent dictatorship that some people have announced to be the best form of government in the future, basically a giant technocracy fed by your data. And so we have written this piece in Scientific American, Will Democracy Survive Big Data and Artificial Intelligence? Because some people have really asked this question, is democracy an outdated technology? They say it has created wealth, health, and happiness for billions of people all over the world, but now they want to try something new. And what would that be? Larry Page also said, and there are a lot of things that we'd like to do. Unfortunately, we cannot do it because there are laws that don't allow us to do it. The question is, are they doing it anyway somewhere? But what we know is Google is actually trying to come up with a new operating system for societies, reprogram the state. And also IBM basically is working on this, and Facebook too. And so even the economists one day had discovered and suggested social media threaten democracy. And in fact, high-level politicians in Germany have made statements in this direction too. So these opinion bots are a deadly danger for democracy, and we would have to do something against social bots that come up with these personalized messages that manipulate our minds without us even noticing. Did you know you have been manipulated? Your minds have been controlled. Who was aware of this? And who thought you would take your own decisions? Yeah, okay. It's a mix, to be fair, but anyway. And then there's this other problem. What happens in the labor market? How will our economy change when robots basically do jobs for free? Will there be an end of work, as some people suggest, or will we just have new jobs, as other people claim, without being able to say what kind of jobs that would be? Well, in any case, we can say there's a new technological revolution, a digital revolution. And when the Industrial Revolution came, we had about 70% jobs in the agricultural sector, and now it's less than 5%, right? It took more than a generation for the economy and society to recover from that shock of transformation. And we do see, actually, that unemployment among young people in particular is skyrocketing in some countries. And in the past, we had a trick, basically. Of course, we had always more and more automation through technology. Production became ever more efficient. But then politicians came up with new laws and said, now we have to increase quality thresholds, basically, and required new things to be taken care of in companies, and so companies had to employ new people, and this way they made sure that unemployment didn't skyrocket, because hadn't they introduced all those additional laws, we would have very low employment numbers already for a long time. And now the question is, those jobs that have been created, basically service jobs, wouldn't they be replaced also by AI systems? And that's probably what's going to happen.
So I'm very excited about the opportunities. I'm also concerned about the problems. The problem here is that every area in blue on this map is somewhere where services are over 80% of employment. What are services? These are services. These are also the exact things that computers have just learned how to do. So 80% of the world's employment in the developed world is stuff that computers have just learned how to do. What does that mean? Well, it'll be fine. It'll be replaced by other jobs. For example, there'll be more jobs for data scientists. Well, not really. It doesn't take
seen this once before, of course. In the Industrial Revolution, we saw a step change in capability thanks to engines. The thing is, though, that after a while, things flattened out. There was social disruption, but once engines were used to generate power in all the situations, things really settled down. The machine learning revolution is going to be very different to the Industrial Revolution, because the machine learning revolution, it never settles down. The better computers get at intellectual activities, the more they can build better computers to be better at intellectual capabilities. However, when I often tell people about this situation, people can be quite dismissive. Well, computers can't really think, they don't emote, they don't understand poetry, we don't really understand how they work. So what? Computers right now can do the things that humans might spend most of their time being paid to do. So now's the time to start thinking about how we're going to adjust our social structures and our economic structures to be aware of this new reality.
Du, da schaltet sich ein Videoconferencing ein. Ich fühle mich beobachtet. Okay, so this talk was given 3 years ago. He said in 5 years it will be off the charts. I mean, 2 years left basically, right? So he was saying we need to reinvent our economy and our society, right? And also Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates, they all think actually there are some issues. And we have already mentioned robots in production and also in medical systems. And now we have surgical robots, and robot lawyers are basically on the way. And there are even some companies that use AI systems actually as company directors. They would sit on a board of directors and basically have a vote in the decisions that are being taken. There are even some people who suggest robots as assistant professors. And some people who would like to have robots run entire countries. So in 2020, will they have a robot run for the office of Prime Minister? And they seem to be serious about this. So basically, there are a lot of jobs basically where you might run into trouble. Even uni assistant, uni professor, and so on are being listed here. So it doesn't look very comfortable. And yeah, there is really heavy transformation going on in our economy now. Every country wants to build a Silicon Valley. Finally, you know, they've woken up. But then if you look into the maps, then you basically see the world's largest IT companies are located in the United States and China. And the world's largest internet companies are located in the USA and China and South Korea. And then the world's largest software companies are located in USA and Germany. Okay, Germany, and then it seems to be also Spain. SAP and Amadeus seems to be the only software companies in Europe that really matter. Now, the serious issue is that this entire sector is evolving exponentially, so it's accelerating all the time in speed and innovation capacity. And so if you basically try to catch up with a delay, and you even manage to invest as much money, and you have as many well-educated people who work as hard as in the Silicon Valley, and you would have the same acceleration curve, the distance would still grow because of the nature of the exponential function. So you could never catch up, you know. So we are living in times where we're in the middle of a new technological revolution. And if you look into the history book, then basically the history books suggest that in these times there would be financial and economic crisis, but there would be also revolutions and wars. A financial and economic crisis has already occurred in many countries. Now, revolution and wars we would like to avoid, of course. But this is a tricky thing. It requires very smart people like you come up with better solutions than people try to implement in the past. So we are really at the beginning of a new age. And it's important that we understand the nature of these systems and how they interact with society and with people and how they influence our life. And in the age of AI, said Obama, we need to remake society, right? So this time it's not enough to invent new racing cars and drones and helicopters and all sorts of technical stuff. We need to reinvent society. You know, it's entirely different, a much bigger task to be accomplished. You know, people like George Soros, who's a well-known globalist and investor and heard and listened to by many politicians and a libertarian as well, you know, he recently warned of a big risk for civilization altogether. You know, he was talking about the danger of a nuclear war, but also he said other things. He criticized Google and Facebook heavily because they would have the potential to create a totalitarian nightmare as we know it from Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, and George Orwell, 1984, you know. And he has sold his stocks recently of those companies that he called enemies of democracy. Now we see news that are talking about a techlash, that means a technological backlash that is in the beginning. So there's basically a race against the tech giants. More and more criticism, people are waking up, and even those people who are in the middle of those technologies and have come up with some of these technologies are becoming careful and critical and concerned. And of course, one of the questions is, who owns and who should have control of the digital double that has been created about us? So I mentioned basically all your activities are leaving data traces, and the estimate is that this is about 1 megabyte or even a gigabyte per person per day. That's the amount of data collected about you, you know, between 1 million and 1 billion digits. That's an amazing amount of data, a very fine-grained description of your personality, you know, and that will increasingly include your psychology, your personality, your characteristics of your body, your health, your genes, and who knows what. So, you know, who should have control of that digital double that does exist, but you probably didn't even know about it? Who knew that there was a digital double, a very detailed digital double of you? 1, 2 people. So now people say we need to kind of get our data back. We need to get control of our data, and here was a proposal by the World Economic Forum a couple of years back. It was called the New Deal on Data. It was aiming to achieve a balance between the interests of business, public, and private individuals, and give people control over the data through personal data stores, basically a data mailbox for everyone. And then you could basically administer the data and determine who should have access to what pieces of data for what applications for what period of time. And yeah, that has been developed to some extent, but it has never been fully implemented politically. And I think it's about time to do this. We have also recently made a proposal. You said we have to get away from those war rooms, because basically those digital doubles that have been created about you, they're being used to run a world simulation, perhaps even with 7 billion people, to figure out possible futures, and it works like a war room, right? There are military guys who basically look into these scenarios and then change a few parameters, like in the mind control room of Tristan Harris, as we've heard him before, and I would basically try to get the world into particular directions or not. And we said, no, it's time really to change this towards peace rooms. And peace rooms would be different from war rooms by offering more transparency, by operating within a democratic framework, by employing interdisciplinary teams of scientists, by ethical experts, by multi-perspective approaches and participatory opportunities. So NGOs and civil society and citizen science and all that crowdsourcing could basically contribute, and was also published in Nature, by the way. And some people even go so far that they now say platforms like Amazon, Google, Facebook have to be bought by our governments in order to get back control. I don't want to take position here, just want to say that there is an increasing interest in what is called ethically aligned design. So the IEEE, the biggest engineering institution in the world, is actually working on this, and they want to come up with responsible innovation, something that we also call value-oriented design, and we'll have Marcus talk in a few minutes about this. And in fact, at TU Delft, I'm leading a PhD school called Engineering Social Technologies for a Responsible Digital Future. And it has been created in response to those challenges that are around. And there are currently 8 PhD students. They're working on different subjects such as trust and reputation, countering rumors, also the fake news problem, values and norms, cooperation, co-creation, meaningful social interaction, I mean, new kind of social platforms and gaming, engaging people to talk to each other and interact with each other, not remotely, and participatory resilience and energy resilience. So this is what is going on there. So I hope that was giving you a good overview of those technologies and issues that are around. Now we'd like to get within this semester an in-depth view of some of those problems and even more of them, because the best engineers in Europe and even beyond is coming from ETH Zurich, and they should be aware of those implications of the technology they're building, and knowing about the ethical, social, legal, economic, and societal implications will allow you to build better technology, and that is the idea. So we want to raise your ethical awareness, and also this book over here, that science fiction I got, is to be understood in that way, to basically draw your attention to some of the issues that could occur if you don't pay enough attention.